Hello and welcome to my channel, Healing with Charlie, where I talk about all things attachment styles and no contact. My name is Charlie, and I'm a healed fearful avoidant. After many years of doing the work, I now lean secure. If you're looking for some free resources, check the description. I have some free journals, I have guides on reconnecting with an avoidant ex, and also another guide on how to determine if they're avoidant or just not interested. Additionally, if you're looking to connect with me one-on-one, feel free to check out my booking link in the description. I'd be happy to work with you personally to learn more about your story and maybe share some advice on my experience as a healed fearful avoidant. With that said, today we're going to be talking about the typical relationship cycle for an unhealed fearful avoidant. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my personal experience as someone who was once an unhealed fearful avoidant, but also maybe some experience with dating other fearful avoidants as well. What I will start off by saying is typically you find that fearful avoidants date other fearful avoidants because they tend to have similar needs and similar styles when it comes to dating. They can actually work off of one another really well without having to necessarily overly communicate. So if you're in a relationship with a fearful avoidant, there's a chance you might be fearful avoidant as well, and you're just not aware of it, and that's okay. But there's going to be a lot discussed in today's video that might shed some light on your relationship patterns or patterns you've experienced with another fearful avoidant. So, fearful avoidant relationships are intense. That's the main word I would share for it. And this is different than, say, a relationship with a dismissive avoidant, which tends to be like a slow burn. It tends to organically develop over time. And then depending on how dismissive they can be, it can actually take almost years to develop to the point where you both actually become a committed couple. But fearful avoidants, they're hot, they're burning with passion and intensity, and they tend to move very quickly. So during the honeymoon phase, the first phase of a relationship with a fearful avoidant, when you're just starting to, initially interact or bond with each other, they'll be very intense. They'll show up almost with a secure attachment style. And this is what takes a lot of people by confusion later, because they think, oh, in the beginning, my person, they showed up so secure, they were so confident and weren't showing any signs of insecurity or doubting the connection. They seem so sure of themselves, essentially is what I'm getting at. And this is typically what happens with fearful avoidance. It's common, but you have to understand what's happening underneath the hood, so to speak. So when you're going through a honeymoon phase with a fearful avoidant, you're meeting them at a time where their desire for connection is greater than their fear of intimacy. And these are the two biggest forces that motivate and influence a fearful avoidant. You have one cup that has their desire for connection, and then another cup, which is their fear of intimacy. When one cup becomes more filled, the other one is typically less filled. And this is what causes them to typically have a push-pull dynamic throughout the course of the relationship. During the honeymoon phase, you're finding them at a point where their fear of intimacy is actually really low and their drive for connection is very high. And that's what makes them lead so intensely. Again, you're meeting them from a place of a dysregulated nervous system where they seek out connection in such a way where they go about it in a means that almost secures it very quickly and very easily. And they typically tend to attach to people who are very open, very present, very attentive, very giving. And these are the people who tend to lean more anxious typically. And when they find that person, it's almost like an intense magnetic connection. Everything just clicks seamlessly. It's almost as if you both have known each other the whole time, or you were meant to find each other. It's very fantastical. And there's a lot of almost fantasy involved on both sides. The fearful avoidant person shows up and has such clear compassion and communication for the anxious person or the other person, and then the other person is providing presence and direction and clarity that the fearful avoidant so desires. So it almost becomes like a perfect combination for those two people to bond and connect. Now, all of this goes really well until there's at some point in the connection where a fearful avoidant feels a threat of some kind. There's something that threatens their perceived sense of independence and almost sparks an unknown fear that they don't realize they have. Typically, this can be the fear of engulfment, of over-enmeshment. This can also be the fear of maybe not being good enough for the other person. So it's going to be different for every person depending on what their dominant core wound is. But typically you find for those fearful avoidants that lean more anxious, there's sometimes a fear of not being good enough. They have doubts as to whether or not they'd be a good partner, a good lover, or if they can consistently show up in a way that the other person needs. They also have a strong desire for their independence. And this is when they start to pull back. They have this internal struggle with, I want connection, but I also need space. And again, this is that battle between the desire for connection, but also the fear of intimacy. You're finding that after they've gotten their connection needs met, the fear of intimacy starts to come up, but the desire for connection tends to go down lower. And this is that internal struggle that they're going through because of their dysregulated nervous system. So they can't always pinpoint what they're feeling, but they still understand that seeking isolation and seeking space feels safe. And so it's typically within this space that they begin to feel relief. The anxiety starts to soothe, and then they start to tell themselves like, well, this must be a good thing. When seeking space and isolation, I feel safe, therefore that's good, therefore I shouldn't be with this person. And this is when they begin to deactivate, which then leads into the breakup. And they'll start to soft launch this by saying things like they're not ready for a relationship or they need their space. They'll use a number of phrases to basically say without saying that they need to break up. So they'll say it in phrases that leave the door open to reconnection if they so decide to come back later. And you might even find some of them will push for friendship instead. This is what repeats the cycle. So typically you'll go through a certain period if you are someone who isn't chasing after them, a period of quiet or what's sometimes called no contact. And what you'll find is the fearful avoidant will organically lean into that because this is where they start to regulate their own emotions in isolation. They start to go back to the life that they had previously, whether it was a rich social life or focusing on work or whatever it is they do to self-soothe. They're going to be relying on that to essentially regulate their emotions and create a more comfortable equilibrium. It's typically during this time where once they start to stabilize, they will begin to feel nostalgia for the relationship. It's normal when you no longer have someone in your life, you no longer have access to them, that you start to miss them, right? Because you start to realize all the ways in which they provided a lot of value. It's only normal. Everybody goes through this. And so this is where they start to look back on the connection with fond eyes and memories. And for the unhealed fearful avoidant who leans more anxious, this will typically lead into a period of reconnection, or at least they'll try, especially if the connection ended on amicable terms. You know, it wasn't like overly dramatic. It wasn't a huge fight. You didn't chase after them. You didn't try to bargain, or you didn't try to bend on any of your needs in order to make them stay. They will typically come back and see if they still have access to you. It'll be a soft check-in at first, usually, just to see how you're doing. How have you been? My experience, those fearful avoidants who leaned more avoidant typically don't do soft check-ins until much time has passed. They take much longer. But those who are anxious tend to kind of reach out much sooner, simply because they are able to understand their emotions much faster. And so the cycle then repeats from here. They want to begin attaching again. They want to pick up where things left off. And this just reinforces the anxious avoidant dance, as it's called, or the regulator and decider relationship dynamic, where you, as the person in a relationship with a fearful avoidant, you become the regulator for their nervous system, and they become the decider in deciding when the connection is on and when the connection is off. So the most important thing is to recognize that if you are inherently taking on the role of a regulator for a fearful avoidant, it's going to reinforce the cycle of connection and disconnection. Try to get out of that quickly. You can try to do that by working with your avoidant or fearful avoidant, but if they don't show any interest in wanting to heal or work on themselves, or they become defensive at the mere thought of them being imperfect, then you have to have an uncomfortable conversation with yourself or a friend or family member to understand that that's not the healthiest dynamic for you to exist within. This is a pattern that is predictable. It is fixable, but it can't be fixed by one person. So this is the typical fearful avoidance cycle for a fearful avoidant who is unaware. It can be very draining and very exhausting for both people involved, but even more so for the person who is in a relationship with them, really cares for them, sees them pull away and brings them back and gets this new perceived sense of hope to only have it crushed and broken again when they inevitably pull away. I've been there multiple times and it hurts. It really does hurt. So if you're going through this right now, I feel for you. I want you to know that you don't have to stay in this type of dynamic. And as someone who has healed this pattern in themselves, I understand just how destructive it is on your nervous system. That's what matters most at the end of the day. If you're someone in a relationship or in a disconnection with someone like this, you matter more than they do. So please believe that. And when somebody tells you they're not sure or they're not ready, believe them. Don't try and force it. Don't try to convince them. Don't bargain with them. Don't say you'll wait for them. You don't have to wait for the right connection at the end of the day. So I hope you got some value out of this video. I hope it gave you some insight and some clarity. If you're currently going through this and you want to have a more tailored discussion, again, my one-on-one booking link is in the description. I'd be happy to work with you and share advice and insight and maybe some clarity on next steps you can take to navigate this situation. Again, if you're looking for some free resources, the description has some there available for you. And if you really enjoy this content, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and maybe share your experience with a fearful avoidant. What was that like for you, and where do you find yourself today? There are a lot of people who read my comments and are looking for some insight from other people watching videos just like this, and you never know, your comment might actually help someone make that first difficult choice to start choosing themselves. So thank you again for watching. I appreciate all the support. As I mentioned in some of my videos a while ago, I'm just starting this channel back up again and would appreciate you to join me along this journey as I try to help other people grow and heal from anxious avoidant relationship dynamics. So thank you again. In the meantime, feel free to check out this video on some relevant fearful avoidant information, and I'll catch you in the next one.